ourselves and the enemy. The aim of this dictatorship is to protect all our people so that they can devote themselves to peaceful labor and build China into a socialist country with a modern industry, agriculture, science, and culture. End quote. On the correct handling of contradictions among the people, February 27th, 1957. Quote, "The people's democratic dictatorship needs the leadership of the working class, for it is only the working class that is most far-sighted, most selfless, and most thoroughly revolutionary. The entire history of revolution proves that without the leadership of the working class, revolution fails, and that with the leadership of the working class, revolution triumphs." End quote. On the People's Democratic Dictatorship, June 30th, 1949. Quote, "The People's Democratic Dictatorship is based on the alliance of the working class, the peasantry and the urban petty bourgeoisie, and mainly on the alliance of the workers and the peasants. Because these two classes comprise 80 to 90% of China's population, these two classes are the main force in overthrowing imperialism and the Kuomintang reactionaries. The transition from new democracy to socialism also depends mainly upon their alliance. Class struggle, the struggle for production and scientific experiment are the three great revolutionary movements for building a mighty socialist country. These movements are a sure guarantee that communists will be free from bureaucracy and immune against revisionism and dogmatism, and will forever remain invincible. They are a reliable guarantee that the proletariat will be able to unite with the broad working masses and realize a democratic dictatorship. If, in the absence of these movements, the landlords, rich peasants, counter-revolutionaries, bad elements, and ogres of all kinds were allowed to crawl out, while our cadres were to shut their eyes to all this, and in many cases fail even to differentiate between the enemy and ourselves, but were to collaborate with the enemy and were corrupted, divided and demoralized by him, if our cadres were thus pulled out or the enemy were able to sneak in, and if many of our workers, peasants, and intellectuals were left defenseless against both the soft and the hard tactics of the enemy, then it would not take long, perhaps only several years or a decade, or several decades at most, before a counter-revolutionary restoration on a national scale inevitably occurred. The Marxist-Leninist Party would undoubtedly become a revisionist party or a fascist party, and the whole of China would change its color." End quote. Note on the 7 well-written documents of Zhejiang Province concerning cadres. Participation in physical labor. May 9th, 1963. Quote, "The People's Democratic Dictatorship uses two methods. Towards the enemy, it uses the method of dictatorship. That is, for as long a period of time as is necessary, it does not let them take part in political activities and compels them to obey the law of the people's government and to engage in labor, and through labor, transform themselves into new men. Towards the people, on the contrary, it uses the method not of compulsion, but of democracy. That is, it must necessarily let them take part in political activities and does not compel them to do this or that, but uses the method of democracy in educating and persuading them." End quote. Closing speech at the second session of the First National Committee of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, June 23rd, 1950. Quote, "Under the leadership of the Communist Party, the Chinese people are carrying out a vigorous rectification movement in order to bring about the rapid development of socialism in China on a firmer basis. It is a movement for carrying out a nationwide debate which is both guided and free. A debate in the city and the countryside on such questions as the socialist road versus the capitalist road, the basic system of the state and its major policies, the working style of party and government functionaries, and the question of the welfare of the people. A debate which is conducted by setting forth facts and reasoning things out, so as correctly to resolve those actual contradictions among the people which demand immediate solution. This is a socialist movement for the self-education and self-remolding of the people." End quote. Speech at the meeting of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR in celebration of the 40th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution, November 6, 1957. Quote, "Most arduous tasks lie ahead of us in the great work of construction. Although there are over 10 million members in our party, they still constitute a very small minority of the country's population. In government departments and public organizations and enterprises, much work has to be done by non-party people. It is impossible to get this work well done unless we are good at relying on the masses and cooperating with non-party people, while continuing to strengthen the unity of the whole party. We must also continue to strengthen the unity of all our nationalities, democratic classes, democratic parties, and people's organizations, and to consolidate and expand the People's Democratic United Front. And we must conscientiously get rid of every unhealthy manifestation and any link in our work that is detrimental to the unity between the party and the people. End quote. Opening address at the 8th National Congress of the Communist Party of China, September 15, 1956. Chapter 4. The correct handling of contradictions among the people. Quote, "We are confronted by two types of social contradictions, those between ourselves and the enemy, and those among the people themselves. The two are totally different in their nature." End quote. On the correct handling of contradictions among the people, February 27th, 1957. Quote, "To understand these two different types of contradictions correctly, we must first be clear on what is meant by the people and what is meant by the enemy. At the present stage, the period of building socialism, the classes, strata, and social groups which favor, support, and work for the cause of socialist construction all come within the category of the people, while the social forces and groups which resist the socialist revolution and are hostile to or sabotage socialist construction are all enemies of the people. In the conditions prevailing in China today, the contradictions among the people comprise the contradictions within the working class, the contradictions within the peasantry, the contradictions within the intelligentsia, the contradictions between the working class and the peasantry, the contradictions between the workers and peasants on the one hand, and the intellectuals on the other, the contradictions between the working class and other sections of the working people on the one hand, and the national bourgeoisie on the other, the contradictions within the national bourgeoisie, and so on. Our people's government is one that genuinely represents the people's interests. It is a government that serves the people. Nevertheless, there are still certain contradictions between the government and the people. These include contradictions among the interests of the state, the interests of the collective, and the interests of the individual, between democracy and centralism, between the leadership and the led, and the contradiction arising from the bureaucratic style of work of certain government workers and their relations with the masses. All these are also contradictions among the people. Generally speaking, the people's basic identity of interests underlies the contradictions among the people. The contradictions between ourselves and the enemy are antagonistic contradictions. Within the ranks of the people, the contradictions among the working people are non-antagonistic, while those between the exploited and the exploiting classes have a non-antagonistic aspect in addition to an antagonistic aspect. In the political life of our people, how should right be distinguished from wrong in one's words and actions? On the basis of the principles of our Constitution, the will of the overwhelming majority of our people, and the common political positions which have been proclaimed on various occasions by our political parties and groups, we consider that, broadly speaking, the criteria should be as follows. 1. Words and actions should help to unite and not divide the people of our various nationalities. 2. They should be beneficial and not harmful to socialist transformation and socialist construction. 3. They should help to consolidate and not undermine or weaken the people's democratic dictatorship. 4. They should help to consolidate and not undermine or weaken democratic centralism. 5. They should help to strengthen and not discard or weaken the leadership of the Communist Party. 6. They should be beneficial and not harmful to international socialist unity and the unity of the peace-loving people of the world. Of these 6 criteria, the most important are the socialist path and the leadership of the party. The question of suppressing counter-revolutionaries is one of a struggle between ourselves and the enemy. a contradiction between ourselves and the enemy. Among the people, there are some who see this question in a somewhat different light. Two kinds of persons hold views different from ours. Those with a rightist way of thinking make no distinction between ourselves and the enemy, and take the enemy for our own people. They regard as friends the very persons whom the broad masses regard as enemies. Those with a left way of thinking magnify contradictions between ourselves and the enemies to such an extent that they take certain contradictions among the people for contradictions with the enemy and regard as counter-revolutionaries persons who are not really counter-revolutionaries. Both of these views are wrong. Neither can lead to the correct handling of the question of suppressing counter-revolutionaries or to a correct assessment of this work. Qualitatively different contradictions can only be resolved by qualitatively different methods. For instance, the contradiction between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie is resolved by the method of socialist revolution. The contradiction between the great masses of the people and the feudal system is resolved by the method of democratic revolution. The contradiction between the colonies and imperialism is resolved by the method of national revolutionary war. The contradiction between the working class and the peasant class in socialist society is resolved by the method of collectivization and mechanization in agriculture. Contradiction within the Communist Party is resolved by the method of criticism and self-criticism. The contradiction of society and nature is resolved by the method of developing the productive forces. The principle of using different methods to resolve different contradictions is one which Marxist-Leninists must strictly observe. End quote. On contradiction, August 1937. Quote, the only way to settle questions of an ideological nature or controversial issues among the people is by the democratic method, the method of discussion, of criticism, of persuasion, and education, and not by the method of coercion or repression. To be able to carry on their production and studies effectively and to arrange their lives properly, the people want their government and those in charge of production and of cultural and educational organizations to issue appropriate orders of an obligatory nature. It is common sense that the maintenance of public order would be impossible without such administrative regulations. Administrative orders and the method of persuasion and education complement each other in resolving contradictions among the people. Even administrative regulations for the maintenance of public order must be accompanied by persuasion and education, for in many cases, regulations alone will not work. Inevitably, the bourgeoisie and petty bourgeoisie will give expression to their own ideologies. Inevitably, they will stubbornly express themselves on political and ideological questions by every possible means. You cannot expect them to do otherwise. We should not use the method of suppression and prevent them from expressing themselves, but should allow them to do so and at the same time argue with them and direct appropriate criticism at them. We must undoubtedly criticize wrong ideas of every description. It certainly would not be right to refrain from criticism. Look on while wrong ideas spread unchecked and allow them to monopolize the field. Mistakes must be criticized, and poisonous weeds fought wherever they crop up. However, such criticism should not be dogmatic, and the metaphysical method should not be used, but efforts should be made to apply the dialectical method. What is needed in scientific analysis and convincing argument? To criticize the people's shortcomings is necessary, but in doing so, we must truly take the stand of the people and speak out of wholehearted eagerness to protect and educate them. To treat comrades like enemies is to go over to the stand of the enemy. End quote. Talks at the Yunnan Forum on Literature and Art, May 1942. Quote, contradiction and struggle are universal and absolute, but the methods of resolving contradictions, that is, the forms of struggle, differ according to the differences in the nature of the contradictions. Some contradictions are characterized by open antagonism, others are not. In accordance with the concrete development of things, some contradictions which were originally non-antagonistic develop into antagonistic ones, while others which were originally antagonistic develop into non-antagonistic ones. End quote. On contradiction, August 1937. Quote, in ordinary circumstances, contradictions among the people are not antagonistic, but if they are not handled properly, Or if we relax our vigilance and lower our guard, antagonism may arise. In a socialist country, a development of this kind is usually only a localized and temporary phenomenon. The reason is that the system of exploitation of man by man has been abolished, and the interests of the people are basically the same. End quote. On the correct handling of contradictions among the people, February 27, 1957. Quote, in our country, the contradiction between the working class and the national bourgeoisie belongs to the category of contradictions among the people. By and large, the class struggle between the two is a class struggle within the ranks of the people because the Chinese national bourgeoisie has a dual character. In the period of the bourgeoisie democratic revolution, it had both a revolutionary and a conciliationist side to its character. In the period of the socialist revolution, exploitation of the working class for profit constitutes one side of the character of the national bourgeoisie, while its support of the Constitution and its willingness to accept socialist transformation constitute the other. The national bourgeoisie differs from the imperialists, the landlords, and the bureaucratic capitalists. The contradiction between the national bourgeoisie and the working class is one between the exploiter and the exploited, and is by nature antagonistic. But in the concrete conditions of China, this antagonistic class contradiction can, if properly handled, be transformed into a non-antagonistic one and be resolved by peaceful methods. However, it will change into a contradiction between ourselves and the enemy if we do not handle it properly and do not follow the policy of uniting with, criticizing, and educating the national bourgeoisie, or if the national bourgeoisie does not accept this policy of ours. It, the counter-revolutionary rebellion in Hungary in 1956, was a case of reactionaries inside a socialist country, in league with the imperialists, attempting to achieve their conspiratorial aims by taking advantage of contradictions among the people to foment dissension and stir up disorder. This lesson of the Hungarian events merits attention. End quote. Chapter 5. War and Peace. Quote, war is the highest form of struggle for resolving contradictions when they have developed to a certain stage between classes, nations, states, or political groups, and it has existed ever since the emergence of private property and of classes. End quote. Problems of Strategy in China's Revolutionary War, December 1936. Quote, war is the continuation of politics. In this sense, war is politics and war itself is a political action. Since ancient times, there has never been a war that did not have a political character. But war has its own particular characteristics, and in this sense, it cannot be equated with politics in general. War is the continuation of politics by other means. When politics develops to a certain stage beyond which it cannot proceed by the usual means, war breaks out to sweep the obstacles from the way. When the obstacle is removed and our political aim attained, the war will stop. But if the obstacle is not completely swept away, the war will have to continue till the aim is fully accomplished. It can therefore be said that politics is war without bloodshed, while war is politics with bloodshed. End quote. On Protracted War, May 1938. Quote, history shows that wars are divided into two kinds, just and unjust. All wars that are progressive are just, and all wars that impede progress are unjust. We communists oppose all unjust wars that impede progress, but we do not oppose progressive, just wars. Not only do we communists not oppose just wars, we actively participate in them. As for unjust wars, World War I is an instance in which both sides fought for imperialist interests. Therefore, the communists of the whole world firmly opposed that war. The way to oppose a war of this kind is to do everything possible to prevent it before it breaks out, and once it breaks out, to oppose war with war. To oppose unjust war with just war whenever possible. Revolutions and revolutionary wars are inevitable in class society, and without them, it is impossible to accomplish any leap in social development and to overthrow the reactionary ruling classes, and therefore impossible for the people to win political power. End quote. On Contradiction, August 1937. Quote, Revolutionary war is an antitoxin which not only eliminates the enemy's poison, but also purges us of our own filth. Every just revolutionary war is endowed with tremendous power and can transform many things or clear the way for their transformation. The Sino-Japanese War will transform both China and Japan. Provided China perseveres in the War of Resistance and in the United Front, the old Japan will surely be transformed into a new Japan, and the old China into a new China. And people and everything else in both China and Japan will be transformed during and after the war. End quote. On Protracted War, May 1938. Quote, Every communist must grasp the truth. Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. End quote. Problems of War and Strategy, November 6, 1936. Quote, The seizure of power by armed force, the settlement of the issue by war, is a central task in the highest form of revolution. This Marxist-Leninist principle of revolution holds good universally, for China and for all other countries. Without armed struggle, neither the proletariat nor the people, nor the Communist Party, would have any standing at all in China, and it would be impossible for the revolution to triumph. In these years, the 18 years since the founding of the party, the development, consolidation, and Bolshevization of our party have proceeded in the midst of revolutionary wars. Without armed struggle, the Communist Party would assuredly not be what it is today. Comrades throughout the party must never forget this experience for which we have paid in blood. End quote. Introducing the Communist, October 4th, 1939. Quote, According to the Marxist theory of the state, the army is the chief component of state power. Whoever wants to seize and retain state power must have a strong army. Some people ridicule us as advocates of the omnipotence of war. Yes, we are advocates of the omnipotence of revolutionary war. That is good, not bad. It is Marxist. The guns of the Russian Communist Party created socialism. We shall create a democratic republic. Experience in the class struggle in the era of imperialism teaches us that it is only by the power of the gun that the working class and the laboring masses can defeat the armed bourgeoisie and landlords. In this sense, we may say that only with guns can the whole world be transformed. End quote. Problems of War and Strategy, November 6, 1938. Quote, We are advocates of the abolition of war. We do not want war, but war can only be abolished through war. And in order to get rid of the gun, it is necessary to take up the gun. War, this monster of mutual slaughter among men, will finally be eliminated by the progress of human society, and in the not-too-distant future, too. But there is only one way to eliminate it, and that is to oppose war with war. To oppose counter-revolutionary war with revolutionary war. To oppose national counter-revolutionary war with national revolutionary war. And to oppose counter-revolutionary class war with revolutionary class war. When human society advances to the point where classes and states are eliminated, there will be no more wars, counter-revolutionary or revolutionary, unjust or just. That will be the era of perpetual peace for mankind. Our study of the laws of revolutionary war springs from the desire to eliminate all wars. Herein lies the distinction between us communists and all the exploiting classes. End quote. Problems of Strategy in China's Revolutionary War, December 1936. Quote, Our country and all the other socialist countries want peace. So do the people of all the countries of the world. The ones who crave war and do not want peace are certain monopoly capitalist groups and a handful of imperialist countries which depend on aggression for their profits. End quote. Opening address at the 8th National Congress of the Communist Party of China, September 15th, 1956. Quote, To achieve a lasting world peace, we must further develop our friendship and cooperation with the fraternal countries in the socialist camp and strengthen our solidarity with all peace-loving countries. We must endeavor to establish normal diplomatic relations on the basis of mutual respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty and of equality and mutual benefit. With all countries, willing to live together with us in peace. We must give active support to the national independence and liberation movement in countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, as well as to the peace movement and to just struggles in all the countries of the world. As for the imperialist countries, we should unite with their peoples and strive to coexist peacefully with those countries, do business with them and prevent any possible war. But under no circumstances should we harbor any unrealistic notions about them. End quote. On the correct handling of contradictions among the people. February 27th, 1957. Quote, "We desire peace. However, if imperialism insists on fighting a war, we will have no alternative but to take the firm resolution to fight to the finish before going ahead with our construction. If you are afraid of war day in, day out, what will you do if war eventually comes? First, I said that the east wind is prevailing over the west wind and war will not break out. And now I have added these explanations about the situation in case war should break out. Both possibilities have thus been taken into account." End quote. Speech at the Moscow meeting of Communist and Workers' Parties, November 18th, 1957. Quote, "People all over the world are now discussing whether or not a third world war will break out. On this question, too, we must be mentally prepared and do some analysis. We stand firmly for peace and against war. But if the imperialists insist on unleashing another war, we should not be afraid of it. Our attitude on this question is the same as our attitude towards any disturbance. First, we are against it. Second, we are not afraid of it. The First World War was followed by the birth of the Soviet Union with a population of 200 million. The Second World War was followed by the emergence of the Socialist camp with a combined population of 900 million. If the imperialists insist on launching a third world war, it is certain that several hundred million more will turn to socialism, and then there will not be much room left on Earth for the imperialists. It is also likely that the whole structure of imperialism will utterly collapse." End quote. On the correct handling of contradictions among the people. February 27, 1957. Quote, "Make trouble, fail, make trouble again, fail again, till they're doomed. That is the logic of the imperialists and all reactionaries the world over in dealing with the people's cause, and they will never go against this logic. This is a Marxist law. When we say imperialism is ferocious, we mean that its nature will never change, that the imperialists will never lay down their butcher knives, that they will never become Buddhas till they're doomed. Fight, fail, fight again, fail again, fight again, till their victory. That is the logic of the people, and they too will never go against this logic. This is another Marxist law. The Russian People's Revolution followed this law, and so has the Chinese People's Revolution." End quote. Cast away illusions, prepare for struggle. August 14th, 1949. Quote, "Just because we have won victory, we must never relax our vigilance against the frenzied plots for revenge by the imperialists and their running dogs. Whoever relaxes vigilance will disarm himself politically and land himself in a passive position." End quote. Address to the Preparatory Committee of the New Political Consultative Conference, June 15th, 1949. Quote, "The imperialists and their running dogs, the Chinese reactionaries, will not resign themselves to defeat in this land of China. They will continue to gang up against the Chinese people in every possible way. For example, they will smuggle their agents into China to sow dissension and make trouble. That is certain. They will never neglect these activities. To take another example, the imperialists will incite the Chinese reactionaries and even throw in their own forces to blockade China's ports. They will do this as long as it is possible. Furthermore, if they still hanker after adventures, they will send some of their troops to invade and harass China's frontiers. This, too, is not impossible. All this we must take fully into account. The world is progressing. The future is bright and no one can change this general trend of history. We should carry on constant propaganda among the people on the facts of world progress and the bright future ahead, so that they will build their confidence in victory. End quote. On the Chungking negotiations, October 17, 1945. Quote, the commanders and fighters of the entire Chinese People's Liberation Army absolutely must not relax in the least their will to fight. Any thinking that relaxes the will to fight and belittles the enemy is wrong. End quote. Report to the Second Plenary Session of the 7th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, March 5th, 1949. Chapter 6. Imperialism and all reactionaries are paper tigers. Quote, all reactionaries are paper tigers. In appearance, the reactionaries are terrifying, but in reality, they are not so powerful. From a long-term point of view, it is not the reactionaries, but the people who are really powerful. End quote. Talk with the American correspondent Anna Louise Strong, August 1946. Quote, just as there is not a single thing in the world without a dual nature, this is the law of the unity of opposites, so imperialism and all reactionaries have a dual nature. They are real tigers and paper tigers at the same time. In past history, before they won state power and for some time afterwards, the slave-owning class, the feudal landlord class, and the bourgeoisie were vigorous, revolutionary, and progressive. They were real tigers. But with the lapse of time, because of their opposites, the slave class, the peasant class, and the proletariat, grew in strength step by step, struggled against them more and more fiercely. These ruling classes changed step by step into the reverse, changed into reactionaries, changed into backward people, changed into paper tigers. And eventually they were overthrown, or will be overthrown, by the people. The reactionary, backward decaying classes retained this dual nature even in their last life and death struggles against the people. On the one hand, they were real tigers. They devoured people by the millions and tens of millions. The cause of the people's struggle went through a period of difficulties and hardships, and along the path there were many twists and turns. To destroy the rule of imperialism, feudalism, and bureaucrat capitalism in China took the Chinese people more than 100 years and cost them tens of millions of lives before the victory in 1949. Look, were these not living tigers? Iron tigers. Real tigers. But in the end, they changed into paper tigers. Dead tigers. Bean curd tigers. These are historical facts. Have people not seen or heard about these facts? There have indeed been thousands and tens of thousands of them. Thousands and tens of thousands. Hence, imperialism and all reactionaries looked at in essence from a long-term point of view, from a strategic point of view, must be seen for what they are. Paper tigers. On this, we should build our strategic thinking. On the other hand, they are also living tigers, iron tigers, real tigers, which can devour people. On this, we should build our tactical thinking. End quote. Speech at the Wucheng meeting of the Political Bureau of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, December 1st, 1958. Quote, I have said that all reputedly powerful reactionaries are merely paper tigers. The reason is that they are divorced from the people. Look, was not Hitler a paper tiger? Was Hitler not overthrown? I also said that the Tsar of Russia, the Emperor of China, and Japanese imperialism were all paper tigers. As we know, they were all overthrown. U.S. imperialism has not yet been overthrown, and it has the atom bomb. I believe it also will be overthrown. It, too, is a paper tiger. Speech at the Moscow meeting of Communist and Workers' Parties, November 18th, 1957. Quote, lifting a rock only to drop it on one's own feet is a Chinese folk saying to describe the behavior of certain fools. The reactionaries in all countries are fools of this kind. In the final analysis, their persecution of the revolutionary people only serves to accelerate the people's revolutions on a broader and more intense scale. Did not the persecution of the revolutionary people by the Tsar of Russia and by Chiang Kai-shek perform this function in the Great Russian and Chinese revolutions? End quote. Speech at the meeting of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR in celebration of the 40th anniversary of the Great October Socialist Revolution, November 6th, 1957. Quote, U.S. imperialism invaded China's territory of Taiwan and has occupied it for the past 9 years. A short while ago, it sent its armed forces to invade and occupy Lebanon. The United States has set up hundreds of military bases in many countries all over the world. China's territory of Taiwan, Lebanon, and all military bases of the United States on foreign soil are so many nooses round the neck of U.S. imperialism. The nooses have been fashioned by the Americans themselves and by nobody else, and it is they themselves who have put these nooses round their own necks, handing the ends of the ropes to the Chinese people. The people of the Arab countries and all the peoples of the world who love peace and oppose aggression. The longer the U.S. aggressors remain in those places, the tighter the nooses round their necks will become. End quote. Speech at the Supreme State Conference, September 8th, 1959. Quote, imperialism will not last long because it always does evil things. It persists in grooming and supporting the reactionaries in all countries who are against the people. It has forcibly seized many colonies and semi-colonies and many military bases, and it threatens the peace with atomic war. Thus, forced by imperialism to do so, more than 90% of the people of the world are rising or will rise up in struggle against it. Yet imperialism is still alive, still running amok in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. In the West, imperialism is still oppressing the people at home. This situation must change. It is the task of the people of the whole world to put an end to the aggression and oppression perpetrated by imperialism and chiefly by U.S. imperialism. End quote. Interview with the Xinhua news agency correspondent, September 19th, 1958. Quote, riding roughshod everywhere, U.S. imperialism has made itself the enemy of the people of the world and has increasingly isolated itself. Those who refuse to be enslaved will never be cowed by the atom bombs and hydrogen bombs in the hands of the U.S. imperialists. The raging tide of the people of the world against the U.S. aggressors is irresistible. Their struggle against U.S. imperialism and its lackeys will assuredly win still greater victories. End quote. Statement supporting the Panamanian people's just patriotic struggle against U.S. imperialism. January 12th, 1964. Quote, if the U.S. monopoly capitalist groups persist in pushing their politics of aggression and war, the day is bound to come when they will be hanged by the people of the whole world. The same fate awaits the accomplices of the United States. End quote. Speech at the Supreme State Conference, September 8, 1959.